Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Patients would be better off with skin-toned gowns or nude-colored gowns. So I'm going to quickly just talk about a couple ideas, including the gown notion, that I published many years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, with a undergrad student, Kevin Rio. And it comes out of an observation concerning bare skin. Now, when you perceive the skin of others, especially you're adapted to the typical ethnic community around you, you adapt to that baseline and it doesn't seem colory anymore. And that's helpful because you want to see the tiny little baseline shifts away from that baseline color so that you can see whether the person is getting more or less oxygenated. And this is what our color vision in fact evolved for. This is an early 2006 discovery, and my Vino Optics company with colorblind glasses, vein finder glasses, comes out of these kinds of observations. So it's by virtue of seeing color shifts, let's say in your cheeks, relative to unchanged or less changed baseline color, that you can see these subtle skin emotion modulations on bare skin, right? Now, let me just give you an example. Did you know, and I've had an earlier Science Moment video in the first 20 or so, your veins appear greenish blue, something like this. In fact, if you were to look at them through an aperture, they're basically skin tone. Whatever your skin tone is, they're basically that. They're just shifted slightly in the green direction relative to your skin tone. Now, on your skin tone, because of that contrast, this is called color contrast. When something is shifted a little bit on a background that's some basic color, that thing, even though it might be basically the same color as the background, if it's shifted, let's say, in the green direction, you'll perceive it as qualitatively green. Not as, hey, that's shifted in the green direction. No, it's just green. So, your veins aren't green. I mean, perceptually they're green, so I guess they're green, but when seen through an aperture, they're not perceived as green at all. It's via color contrast that we perceive them as green in the first place, because it's shifted in that direction. So there was two different applications that follow from this that had occurred to me a decade and a half ago. And one was that the gowns that people have in the hospital, so they basically get you naked and they put on these ugly gowns, right? Now the gowns are typically white, or they're green, or they're blue. They're these various colors. So for example, let's just put up a blue background here. I'm showing you a blue background, and you can see there's 4 different skin tones on a blue background. The idea is that we're mimicking kind of what a skin tone of various ethnicities might be. Wearing a blue robe is sort of the baseline. And here's a light green sort of robe sort of model, and here's a darker green sort of model here, and then another one white. Now white is not the absence of color. White is a very strong saturated color in terms of perception relative to the baseline, relative to what these skin toned sort of tabs are. And in all of these cases, these 4 skin tones you can see that they're different, right? But they're all roughly skin tone-ish. Now I want to show you what they look like if I put the background not on, with blue, light green, dark green, or white. I make the background skin tone, such that it's kind of in between the average of all 4 of these slightly different skin tone. Okay, now you can see it up here. And what you can see is that now we have 4 qualitatively different. It's genuinely yellow, genuinely red, genuinely green, genuinely blue. These are qualitatively colored like the 4 different parts, the 4 different opponents, red, green, blue, yellow, in the rainbow. They aren't just perceived to be shifted in that direction relative to one another. No, they really are red, yellow, green, and blue, respectively. Now, what's the point of this? The point of this is that if you have part of the reason that we're all good and have a particularly good health sense. We have a health sense, an ability, a natural ability to read health on others. And this comes through our red-green color vision, it having evolved to see oxygenation modulations under the skin. And those who are color deficient are health blind. One of my TED Talks is about exactly that, health blindness, and what does it mean? So we have technology with Vino Optics that helps color deficients get that health sense back, and we can even optimize it even further for health. For color normals, we can even make you a little bit better than what a normal color vision person has. So that natural health sense, doctors have been using it for thousands of years. The Greeks had noticed that That's, one of the standard symptoms or the clinical signs has always been the acute pallor of the skin. It has been that way for 2,000 years. It still is that way to a large extent, given all the modern technology. Still, one of the most powerful technologies we have are the eyeballs of the medical personnel in the room. And one of those great capabilities is our spectral ability to read skin. But we're only good at it when we're seeing skin relative to the baseline shifts on skin, right? If you've got white completely surrounding, white or blue or dark green or light green or any of these really saturated colors that are incredibly far away from the skin tone of the patient, well, now I can modulate, become more oxygenated or deoxygenated or bluer, filling with blood, or less blood, going gaunt because I'm losing blood to my face. And all of these things are going to look roughly skin toned relative to that white or that blue or that green background. But if you can get a gown, hypothetically, that's roughly, ideally exactly your skin tone, then these small deviations are going to be more readily apparent. In fact, they're going to be much more readily apparent because you're going to say, oh my gosh, they're yellow now. They're blue now. They're not shifted yellow relative to whatever they were before. No, they'll just seem yellow. They'll seem red relative to that skin tone matched gown. So it's very simple. You just have to, there's a lot of skin tones and you can't fit them all, and we're incredibly discriminating in terms of the different skin tones of actual people, which is why if you go to cosmetics counters, they'll have just ridiculous numbers of skin tones that have ridiculous numbers of names. But still, having a wider variety of a dozen or so different kinds of skin toned colored gowns, and you pick one that's roughly close to yours, has got to be a lot better than these incredibly far, incredibly saturated colors that are nowhere near skin tone. Now, a related idea is just, this is a similar kind of point, but imagine that the doctor, medical personnel sees me, they come back and they see me again, and my color has changed, suppose. But they may not be able to tell because in some parts of my body, it might have a relatively uniform change. I get entirely more yellow or entirely a little bit greener, or yellower and greener, but it's sufficiently uniform that they come back and they can't really tell. The same thing happens with rashes. Doctors will say, well, let's see if this rash is getting worse. So they'll just put some, magic marker around the rash, because if you come back in 2 days, they're not going to be able to remember where the rash, how big the rash was. But by just putting a magic marker around it, now you can easily see whether it's grown relative to that baseline that you've drawn, because you've shown where the baseline is to see whether it's gotten bigger or smaller. Well, you can do the same thing if you had skin tone little taps. Just imagine just a big palette of 1,000 skin tone tabs, just little stickers, and you just put them on the person's chest or cheek, matching whatever the cheek is. Now, if the medical personnel leaves and comes back in another time, if suddenly that patch is blue, what it means is that the rest of the skin has shifted towards yellow. Blue and yellow are opponents. I qualitatively see that patch as blue. It means, my gosh, my patient has shifted to yellow. If instead it looks yellow, it means the patient has become bluer in the face. It's just the opposite in terms of red and green being opposites and yellow blue being opposites. You'll be able to suddenly perceive the patient to have shifted by virtue of the color of the tab. You'll perceive the color of the tab to have changed, even though it's constant, when in fact the skin has changed. So these are just two kind of simple qualitative ideas that would be simple to implement relative to complex machines that go ping. And I'll put up the paper here. One can always go read more about it. If you go to humanfactorylab.com, that's sort of a human-computer interaction, UX kind of page of mine that goes through lots of different kinds of research that I've been involved in, including that, which you can find in there under the health section. And if you're interested in these kinds of things, get yourself a copy of my earlier book, my second book, bestseller, still quite lively in terms of sales even today after 13 years, Vision Revolution. Get yourself a copy. And if you don't have a copy of Dr. Tim Barber, my new book came out 2 months ago, Expressly Human, on why we have emotional expressions, what it is that useless, totally ineffective face coverings cover over, as well as the true language that we all speak, and the mechanisms by which free expression truly works. Get a copy of Expressly Human, and if you have read it, give us reviews at Amazon, because Journalists are not going to help us. Fellow academics won't help us this time around. We are pariahs. That was your science moment.